Let's start. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining this session, Create a Genuine Connection with Your Audience by Solarzar de la Porta. This is one of the sessions from District 101 program called Great Events. Please check out the official website. Let me post it on the chat right now. Here we go. I hope you can see it. And the District 101 will offer many learning opportunities throughout the year. Let's visit the website time to time to find exciting sessions. With that, let's move on to this session today. I would like to introduce our speaker of the day, Solarzar de la Porta. Solarzar is a 25-year Toastmaster. He is a founder of Magic-4-Life, bringing entertaining education and educational entertainment in the areas of leadership, customer service, and communication. Please welcome Solarzar. Over to you.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Izumi, and thank you so much, Gavin, who actually is the one who first got me here. Now, before we begin, I'm required by law to provide this disclaimer. One, no Toastmasters were harmed in the preparation of this workshop. And in the fine print, I have to point out that this is the fine print that you really are not supposed to be able to read, but which can be referenced at any time by me to offset any liability as a way of not accepting responsibility for the misuse, disuse, poor construction, or poor quality production of any of this material. All claimants will be sterilized. Now that we've got the legal issues out of the way, let's start with why am I here and who am I? Now, at the Division D Club Officer Training in August, Gavin, the Division D director, sat in on some of my Vice President of Public Relations training that I was conducting. And he left and he came back, and then he participated in the discussions, and he even asked questions. Now, after the training, he asked me how I learned to connect with people the way I did in that session. And I told him I was fortunate. It was a small session, and it was easy to create more personal connections with the group. But he asked if I could teach how to make that connection. And I said I didn't know, but I was certainly willing to give it a try. So let me tell you a little bit about me first to get started. I'm originally from New York. I went to Catholic grammar school, and I went to Cardinal Spellman High School in the Bronx on a scholarship. Now, at the age of 16, my father and I had a disagreement about a haircut. The disagreement turned into an argument. The argument turned into a fight. At the age of 16, with an overcoat, a carry bag, and 16 cents, I was thrown out of the house in the middle of February during a snowstorm. I lived on the streets for over 2 years. I did odd jobs. I worked at an offset printing plant. I did some street performances. I did some things with the statute of limitation has run out for, but nonetheless, I did many different things to stay alive. Finally, after 2 years, my father and I reconciled and I returned home. I returned to high school. And then I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps, and I went through the enlisted ranks to the officer ranks before retiring over 21 years. And in 1994, when I retired from the Marine Corps, I became a subject matter expert consultant to the Department of Defense. And I found myself very bored. In 1995, I joined Bayview Toastmasters in Monterey. I've been a Toastmaster continuously ever since then. Now, other than telling you some background about me and giving you an idea of some of my background, that information does not tell you who I am. It's my mythology. Who I am is a result of how I've taken that mythology to make me the person I am today. And one of the things that we don't always recognize is that each of us has our own mythology. We all have our story, but it doesn't define us. So one of the first steps in understanding connection is knowing that everyone has their own story. Everyone has their own background. And in Toastmasters, we commit to provide a mutually supportive and positive learning environment so each member has the opportunity to develop communication and leadership skills, which in turn foster self-confidence and personal growth. You all know that. Most of us join Toastmasters to improve our communication skills, and through Pathways, We learn how to prepare speeches. We learn how to outline speeches. We even learn how to capture the audience attention. That's why I show this picture of me in the fire book. What a great way to get attention at the start of something. But those are only techniques. Now, they're the critical foundation to our speaking. Have you ever heard a perfectly crafted speech and felt unconnected to the speaker or the message? So as we go through Toastmasters, it's valuable to continue to work on our foundation. Our foundation is the same as scales for a concert pianist. They practice scales every day, so we should never lose our foundation. Let's re-examine why we speak. Now, Patricia Fripp tells us that we speak to be heard and understood, but it doesn't stop there. We also speak to be remembered and repeated. Heard, understood, remembered, and repeated. Why do we speak? The foundation of every presentation. We already heard from Patricia Fripp. Heard, understood, remembered, and repeated. That's why we speak. But then there's a difference, as Gavin was mentioning before everyone was here, between the purpose and the premise of our presentations. And we're going to touch on that today. And then the other piece that's important is that how do we find our authentic voice? How do we let people know that they're really hearing from who we are? So let's look at this a little bit more. Why do we speak? To be heard, to be understood, to be remembered and repeated. Those are the basic foundations of why we speak, but we also speak to connect. Connection is the whole purpose of our speaking. We can be heard, but if we don't connect, we won't be understood, we won't be remembered, and we won't be repeated. And in Toastmasters, as I mentioned earlier, we learned these techniques: an attention-getting opener, a presentation of 3 points, a clear transition from one point to the next, a memorable closer for the audience to remember. And we can visit any club, and not only will we hear speakers using that formula, we'll hear evaluators using that as a metric to measure the speaker. So we speak to be heard, to be understood, to be remembered, to be repeated. But most importantly, we need to connect with the audience. And if we don't connect, we won't be heard, we won't be understood, we won't be remembered, and we won't be repeated.
Solarzar, we can hear you.
Did I mute myself? Did you just mute it? Did it just happen, or?
Just happened.
Okay, apologize for that. Okay, so this, what I was saying is, how do we connect? And this is challenging in the Zoom environment because we don't really often get to see the whole audience. Now this group, I could stop sharing and I could look at this wonderful gallery view and see all your faces and pay attention to you that way. But if I actually look at your eyes, I'm actually not looking at your eyes to you. I'm actually looking away from you. So we have to focus on this camera, and it is a little bit of a challenge in our environment to do that. But by connecting, we want to at least respond to what we can see in our Zoom window, see people responding, or listen to Yi Fang when she says you've been muted. We also want to look at people a bit longer when we can. So when Gavin came into that training session, I had gone away from the slides and gone to the gallery view, and I was observing how everyone was reacting. And then I would look at someone and I would specifically call them by name and then go back to looking at the camera. So I was trying to create that eye connection with them. It's a little challenging in this environment, but we can still do it. We want to know to the audience that we're looking at them, that we're listening to them, that we're concerned about them. And then, most importantly, we want to smile and have fun. Now, last week at the Fall Fusion, there was a test speaker for the evaluation contest. And quite frankly, I can't tell you what she spoke about. I mean, I could tell you what she spoke about. Her speech didn't engage me. I didn't feel connected to her through the speech, but when she started, she had this big, bright smile that she kept on through the presentation. So while her speech wasn't engaging to me, nor did I really feel connected to it, that smile made me say, this is someone that I would really like to know. This is someone that I can feel connected to. And so she had me at hello with her smile. And so we should smile as much as we can. Now, I've never liked my smile in life, but when someone smiles at us, we automatically feel a certain level of connection. And also be personal, tell a story. Now, I told you a little story about me in the beginning, a little bit about me. I'm going to tell some other stories going forward. Now, they're not all about me, but when we tell something personal, people can relate to that. People can understand that. We can talk about children or spouses or work or a personal experience we went through, and people get that. So stories, selling our points, not just for the sake of a story, are really a wonderful way to create a connection with an audience. Don't talk about yourself all the way through it, because then it just sounds like you're in love with yourself. And if you are in love with yourself, you might want to keep that from us. But the other thing we want to do is refer to what they already know. Now, adults like to take new information and attach it to information they already have. We call this Velcro learning. And it's the best way for adults to relate. So when we're talking to a Toastmaster audience, we certainly understand certain frames of reference that are the same for all of them. But when we talk to other audiences, we want to find out what some of their references are and create that Velcro learning experience so we can take something new to attach to what they already had. And the last thing, we always want to care. See, public speaking is having a conversation from your heart with words. Speaking is just a performance. Following the Battle of Gettysburg in July 1983, the battleground was declared a national cemetery. The men who died there were going to be reinterred into the consecration of the National Cemetery at Gettysburg. And that was November 19th, 1983. Now, President Abraham Lincoln was invited to say a few words of consecration at the ceremony. They really didn't want him to speak. He wasn't the featured speaker. And he struggled with what he was going to say. And on the train trip to Gettysburg, as many of you know, on the front and back of an envelope, he wrote what became his speech. Now, on the trip, he said he felt weak and dizzy. He complained of a headache. What wasn't known at the time is that he had the onset of smallpox. He went to the event, and there was opening music. There was a prayer. There was a 2-hour oration, music from the Marine Band, a song from the Baltimore Glee Club, and then President Lincoln, weak, dizzy, headachy, with the start of a fever, stood up and delivered 272 words in less than 2 minutes. fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war, and we have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It's altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow our ground. The brave men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little know nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It's for the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It's rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion. That we highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Now, while he did not smile, he observed his audience. He spoke to them from the heart. He complimented their resolve. He told the story of why they were there and what all of them owed to those who died there. President Abraham Lincoln connected with his audience that day and his audience in history. We're not Abraham Lincoln, so why would anyone listen to us? What do we have to bring to our presentations? Oscar Wilde shared with us, be yourself. Everyone else is already taken. See, each of us is unique. Each of us is the best representation of ourselves. So we might as well make that one of our assets to be shared in every speech to be the best self that we can. That goes back to my favorite picture, which is be the authentic you. You know, successful people are not successful because they have traits in common with other successful people. They're successful because they've identified the uniqueness they bring to life and they express it. So in order to be who we are, we have to let go of who we think we should be. Most of us have developed a persona that we project to the world. It's how we want the world to see us. Doesn't mean it's us. And our persona is often formed from our need to be liked. We want others to approve of us. So we may create a persona to match their expectations. And look, oh, now they like us. But is that who we are? So when I was living on the streets, I was like a junkyard dog. A junkyard dog will bite you whether you're trying to hit it or feed it. Either way, you're going to be bit. In the Marine Corps, I learned to create a persona of always being in control and in charge. Once on a temporary assignment to Washington, D.C., I was driving down Constitution Avenue in Washington, and each block has a traffic light. And I was stopped at one, it turned green, and as I took off, in the very worst of driver safety, I looked to the right on my passenger seat and then looked up in time to realize that all the cars in front of me were stopped. I rear-ended the car in front of me. I got out and exchanged information with a very charming young lady, which all I can say is, that's a terrible way to meet charming young ladies. As I drove further into the district, I realized my front hood was not closing fully. So it had a low slant and the accident had damaged the hood latch. So I called the rental car company and they advised me to return the car to their location at Reagan National Airport. So I took the 14th Street Bridge to get to the airport, crossing the Potomac. I was in 5 lanes. I was in the middle lane, doing 55 miles an hour with cars on either side when the hood latch let go. It came up, shattered the windshield, blocking forward vision. I immediately put my emergency flashers on and looked to either side and saw that the cars on either side were just backing away, giving me all the clearance in the world. I managed to pull over to the right, just on the tidal basin, directly across from the Jefferson Memorial. As I got out of the car, this park ranger came running up to me saying, "Did you see that?" And I said, "I was driving the car." And he goes, "Oh, yeah, that's right." So I called the rental car company. They sent a truck. They came and picked me and the car up, brought me to the airport. And as I met the lady to explain what happened, I went through the whole iteration from the initial accident to crossing the bridge to what happened with the hood. And she looked at me as I was explaining it to her and she said, "How do you keep from crying?" And I told her, "It's the uniform. I only cry when I take it off." That was my persona. When I put that uniform on every day, that was my persona, to be in control, to be in charge. But that wasn't really me. That was what it was expected of me as a U.S. Marine. So consider if your persona is who you truly are, or if there are more layers underneath that can be brought out when you're presenting to your audience. So by knowing who you are, that is one step to connecting to your audience. So when Gavin saw me at that training, what he didn't know is that going into that training, I created an intention about the training, which leads me to my point of premise versus purpose. See, premise, I created a premise. The premise was I wanted to serve the needs of those people who came to the training in the best way possible. I didn't necessarily know what that was. Even if I knew the people coming, I didn't know what their needs are. Now, the purpose of my training was to train them on the roles and responsibilities of the VPPR. So what Gavin saw that day was not my purpose. He saw me applying my premise. As people told me what they were interested in, as people told me what they wanted to hear about, I adapted what I was doing to serve their needs. So my premise for the training allowed me to be open to whomever showed up and what they needed to learn in that moment. It wasn't about the objective of the training. It wasn't about the purpose of the training. But when we only focus on the purpose, we lose priority for the most important element, which is the audience. The premise is about the audience. The purpose is about the speech or the presentation. So on September 11th, 2001, I was scheduled to be a luncheon speaker at a local business organization. Now, after seeing planes flying into the World Trade Center and crashing into the Pentagon, I called the business manager to see if they were still meeting. And he said they were, and I suggested I not do what I was scheduled to do. I actually suggested we try something alternate, because what I was going to do is kind of a bit more entertainment. It's a little lighter. And he said, no, they absolutely need to have that. They have to have that. Now, for 20 minutes, I did what he insisted I do, but I looked out at these people, their blank faces, their shocked looks, their disbelief, their uncertainty, their fear. And I stopped and I said, perhaps we can share a quiet moment of prayer and reflection for those we've lost and for those who will have to take our country forward. So it was like air coming out of the balloon from everyone holding their breath. Everyone relaxed. They took their moment. They settled down. They felt more connected. It's the difference between purpose and premise. Never lose a premise, but never force a purpose. So our purpose is the anchor of our presentation. But if we meet the premise and not the purpose, then we've served our audience. But the best premise cannot work if we're not authentic. And sometimes that's not comfortable, which is why Eleanor Roosevelt told us, no one can make us feel inferior without our consent. See, being authentic, a word thrown around like a buzzword, is knowing our flaws, knowing our strengths, and knowing who we are, and speaking from the person we are, not the person others want us to be. So many of us join Toastmasters to learn how to speak and to be seen, but we developed a Toastmaster persona to speak behind. So let's try something. Here I have a $20 bill. If anyone would like it, you can just raise your hand electronically or otherwise. So let me do something with it. I'm folding it up and I made it smaller. Would you still want it? How about if I crumpled it up? Would you still want it? How about if I were standing and I dropped it underfoot and I ground it down under my foot and then picked it up? Would you still want it? You probably would. Why? Because it didn't decrease in value. You see, many times in life we've been made to feel small. We've been crumpled. We've been ground underfoot. But no matter what, we never lose our value, just like this $20 bill. That is why being authentic is the best way of sharing those moments with other people. Why should they listen to us? Because you have value, you're unique, Your audience is unique, and you care, and you learn to speak from your heart. As Max Ehrmann shared in his poem, Desiderata, beyond a wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. You're a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here. So if we don't seem to care about our topic, the audience won't either. And if we don't care about our audience, they won't care about us. So it's simply speak with intention. Use the emotion of your voice, not someone else's. It doesn't have to be big, but it has to sound interested in what you're talking about. And if someone sat at a coffee shop with you and had tea or coffee, bring that same person they're speaking to, that same person speaking to them over that table. Bring that person to your presentation just a little bit bigger. And pay attention to how you speak about the things that you know matter to you, your family, your children, your partners, your hobbies, or other interests that ignite your heart. So use that same passion to speak with your audience. Let them know that you care about your topic and that you care about them. The American novelist and poet Gertrude Stein said, "No one real is boring." What we sometimes look for is techniques to be real. And there's only one way to be real, and that's for you to bring it out. So for every presentation, no matter who shows up, be certain you always bring yourself. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Solarzar. We would like to move on to Q&A session. If you could type your question in the chat, we really appreciate it. Let me see. I have one question.
Sure.
Yes, while we wait for other people to type in. What is the best practice balancing the purpose and premise, or there is no best practice?
Well, I'm not sure that there really is a best practice. It's really just how you want to do it. For instance, we just had humorous speech contests. So if my intention as a humorous speaker was, I want to make the audience laugh, well, that's not really about the audience. It's really more about me. Oh, I want to say funny things so they'll laugh at it. But if my intention were to say, I want to entertain the audience, and my purpose is to bring humor to my presentation to entertain the audience, that's how I break it up. So I try to say, what would the audience want when I get in front of them? They want to be entertained. When I do an evaluation, is it about how good I do an evaluation, or is it how best can I serve that speaker with their presentation to say, what would be of best value to them that I can provide to them? Now, it would be different for you. Izumi, if you evaluated me, it would be different than if Pam evaluated me. But it doesn't matter, because each of you would be bringing your intention to it. And that's who you truly are. Versus, I'm just the great evaluator. Let me show you how.
Thank you so much. Oh, we have a couple of questions. Let me read them out. So one is from Mike Ivy. Can you expand on reacting to audience feedback on Zoom?
Yeah, audience feedback on Zoom is a challenge, Mike. I've got to acknowledge that, and others may have some wonderful ideas about that. Now, when we're in a gallery view like this, it's wonderful because, as I said, I can see people's faces when their video is showing. But and now they've spotlighted me, so I get to see me, and it's the person I know most. But the other thing is that when I was doing something like sharing the slides, I can only see a small band of people. So those are the only ones I can really react to. So I try to pre-think, as I said, with the intention, I try to pre-think of what are the moments where I can bring the pause, or I can bring the humor, or I can bring the drama to try to engage people. And so the simple things I did today that I'll share are I tried to bring pause over moments that I thought were dramatic. At a moment, that gives you the opportunity as an audience member whom I can't see to at least have some emotional connection or intellectual connection to what I just said without rolling over it. So in the Zoom environment, I'm a fast speaker and I have to take more intention to slow down, give those quiet moments so the audience can absorb it. And that's what I try to do initially. When I'm able to see people, as in the training environment that Gavin intended, then I can actually see their physical reactions at that time. But it takes much more work. It is so much harder to gauge audience response and reaction in this environment than when we're in a room in front of people. But I want to ask, there's some very experienced people here, and anyone who would like to share, have you ever been in front of an audience, a physical audience, and you had the person like this, and you said, oh, I'm just not getting through to them. I'm just not, they don't like me. They had a bad day. Their foot got run over. They can't pay the bills. I don't know, but they don't like me. And then that's the person who comes up to you after the presentation to tell you how much they took away from it. Yeah. So we've got to be careful of making too many assumptions about our audience. But if we're trying to intentionally connect with them, we're going to reach people. I don't know if that helps, Mike, or if there's more you needed on that.
Thank you. Let me move on to Alison King. Alison's question. Solarzar, how do you help a person who is performing become more authentic? Feedback sometimes stresses performance.
I listen, and I don't know that this is teachable, which is why when Gavin first asked me, I went through training from Heart Math up in Boulder Creek, and they teach you how to listen through your heart. They give you exercises for doing that, and I'm not empowered to do that. I'm not a trainer of that. But so I listen for where I hear a person's heart, where I think a person is sharing something that's genuine meaning to them. And I try to gauge that. And I think that's the authentic moments. So if I were listening to a speech and someone shared about their pet, their child, their partner, something that's really touching, that I feel really touched by, I know that that was a genuine moment. That's how I receive it. And I'm going to compliment them on that genuine moment. And I'm going to say that I would like to see more of that you in this presentation in these ways. Here's where I think you got into your head and were just giving me the formula. And here's where I thought I was listening to Allison, you know, and that's how I try to do it. But that is so subjective. And so for each of us, poignant moments are different. The poignant moment for someone else may be different than mine, but I try to listen for that moment that I think was heartfelt and share that and emphasize that back to them. And I don't know, Allison, if that fully answers your question.
Not exactly, but why don't you move on? And if it doesn't get answered later, maybe I'll ask it a different way.
Okay, okay.
Next question is from Gavin. How do you pinpoint your specific premise? For instance, how do you think the premise of a Toastmaster? How do you figure out the premise of a Toastmaster member?
Well, that's they're all good questions, but that's a good question, Gavin, because I don't figure out the premise for the member. And maybe I'm answering it, but not answering it. It might be the way the question was asked to me. Is, for instance, in the training, it was pretty clear. I was going to have people show up with different needs. Some are experienced, some are not experienced, some are brand new, some have done it before. And so I know I've got this wide swath of people. And I asked them in the beginning, just as we do in any training, I asked them certainly what their expectations are and what their experience is. Now, when we speak in front of our clubs, we pretty much know our club members. So we have a sense of what they like, what they don't like. So it's easy in our club to create a premise for something larger with those members because we have an understanding of who they are. The challenge comes when we go to a different audience altogether, whether it's going from club to area, division, or district, or just even going outside of our group. And then it's important, from my perspective, for us to find out about their audience as much as we can from whoever's setting it up. What are their likes, dislikes, what are their interests, what are not. And then based on that, I start with the Velcro learning concept. If they do this, they have an interest in this. You know, if they do this, they have an interest in this. Patricia Fripp shares a story that I won't get quite right, so I won't tell the whole story. Of she was asked to speak to a national organization of ministers. She's not a particularly religious person or affiliated with any religion. But she stood up there and she said, I bet you're wondering why I've been asked to speak to you today. She said, do you know that in the Bible, it says 6,784 times, thou shalt. It never says, thou shalt not. And I am here to teach you the ways thou shalt reach your congregations with the way you present your information. So what she did is she found out a piece of information that might have interest to them, and she used it as a reference point to attach her purpose to, premise and purpose. She established immediate credibility with the audience in the very beginning. So I think it's the same thing when we go before our audience. We have to say, here's what I believe is of their interest if we know, like our Toastmaster Club. Here's what we believe is of their need or interest as we know in a training. And if it's an outside group, we need to find out what their interests might be and try to create our premise about that. Does that help, Gavin? Does that answer your question? Thank you. Thank you, Zoom.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Or
Yes. It's a cute one from Urmi Kagrana. Thank you, Urmi. Why did Solarzar don red nail polish to attract the audience attention or to match with background?
Well, actually, this hand is to match with my phoenix. And this hand is to match with my Japanese dragon. So, and I used to work the farmer's market in downtown Monterey, and I would do one-card tarot readings. You know, people would pick a card, and then I would point to the card. You know, and when I point with the colored fingertips, it makes it easier for people to attract their eyes and draw their attention. So it's part of my theatrical dressing. It's every Marine wears nail polish.
It's amazing. Let me read out a comment from Mike. I think this is a good practice. Then I will move on, ask Alison for the follow-up question. Mike has shared with us when a presentation is being shared in Zoom, you can drag the line between the presentation and the gallery to see up to 25 people while you present. Yeah, so thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you, Mike, for pointing that out. Thank you.
Yes. Let's go back to Alison's
Allison, yeah, she had a follow-up.
Thanks. I'm going to try to ask the question a little differently. I don't think it's easy to ask a good question on chat. My question is, if you know someone who wants to make a connection, but all of their Toastmaster feedback seems to suggest to them to be dramatic, you know, with gesture or things that like they're more acting on a stage, and they take that feedback and become, I would say, more theatrical, but less conversational. And for me, the conversation that's well delivered catches my attention more than a performance. So I'm wondering, how do you help a person see the difference who's struggling with that?
Well, if it's someone that's actually asking me, thank you, Allison, for that clarification. That's certainly, and I wish I had made more of a point of that in there, because we have a tendency sometimes to say that, be bigger, be broader, but maybe that's not you. And I just saw a wonderful speech from someone earlier this week that they were told to be, you know, use more vocal variety and more things, but yet they have very natural conversational vocal variety. And because of the way they did it, it really resonated with me. So to get back to the heart of your question, I would actually tell them, evaluation is audience member feedback. We have absolute responsibility ourselves to either accept it or not accept it. And so while we want people to grow, we want people to try something. And there are plenty of speeches in Toastmasters where you do try to be dramatic. That's part of the nature of that presentation. But if I'm talking to you about something that matters to me and I'm just overly dramatic, I'm going to lose you. I can't speak to you authentically and be dramatic at the same time. It's not genuine. And I would tell that person that they need to take a look at their topic and what they're speaking about. If they're talking about something that happened to them, a family member, a personal issue, then they should share it as a conversation, as I said, a little bit bigger because they're before an audience, but conversationally and speak from their heart. Everybody decides how that works for them best, but I would definitely say that an evaluation is not an expert. An evaluation is each of us has an opinion and we share it with another person of what we think we saw that we would like to see better. It doesn't mean it is. That's what I would say, Allison. Does that help? Okay, good.
Thank you. And another
But
cute question.
I
Go
don't
on.
want to, but I want to just say Allison's reached her quota. That's it for her.
Thank you. And I have E-Fan's question. Oh, how do you keep your nails polished during shelter in place?
I go to the spot. I go to the nail place. She calls me twice a week. I go twice a month. I go every other week. I get my nails done every other week. She gives me my coffee. She makes coffee. She makes me a big jug of Vietnamese coffee and gives it to me as soon as I show up, and then she works on me.
Thank you so much. Yes. Oh, moving on to Francois's question. Do we want to work on those skills by exaggerating them at the club so that we would just slightly increase them outside the club?
What a great question. Actually, they all are. I shouldn't now said, oh, what a great question. But what's great about that question is, yeah, this is where we come. We come to our clubs to practice and fail. So we should try to be bigger. We should try something a little different that stretches us, exactly as Francois is saying, so we know where's our median level. You know, so if I don't find a place to try this, I can never find that I belong here. So I agree with that point, and we should feel comfortable trying that out at the club. And if someone says, I didn't like that, I'd like you to be more authentic, take that away as a piece of information. Or if somebody says, I really like that, take that away as a piece of information. But what a great question. Practice it bigger at the club to go outside and find your level. Great question.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
I have one more question. Just about 5 months ago, I visited a club and I felt really bad because I just thought that club, the officer teams, they were very rude. For instance, they didn't ask the guests to introduce themselves, and they even said, if you do not turn on your video, we won't let you speak. And that's what they did, actually. So this brings to my question. It's about the premise, because we have so many clubs from Toastmasters International. What do you think their premise for that meeting? Maybe not for all the meetings. For that meeting, what is the premise for the officer team? What is the mindset or the premise?
Well, I'm going to answer it this way, Gavin, which is going to be half an answer. Certainly when I was speaking today, I'm really talking about when we as an individual speaker go to address our audience and we connect with our audience and we find a way to do that. Every club is its own community and its own culture. I don't know what their premise is. Maybe their members have said, we don't like looking at the gallery if we can't see people's faces. Maybe they've already had that discussion, and maybe they've gone through that with their club. We know that right now we're still dealing with clubs that are trying to adjust from being in person to being on Zoom. Some can embrace it, some are struggling, some don't want to do it at all. So I don't really know what their premise is, but what I would not say that what I shared today was about how a club should function, but more how each of us as individual speakers should consider trying to reach our audience and create that connection. And even though I shared things, I want to share one other point building on that, Gavin. I know it's not the full answer to you. is that just as Allison asked about the evaluation, and we've talked about evaluation a few times, it's individual how each of us do this. It's not for me, whether I'm an evaluation or a friend, to tell you who you are. You have to know who you're comfortable being, and you have to work with that person. And all I'm suggesting is if we're listening to you and say, that's really Azumi, I see Azumi in this presentation, then we're going to connect with that. We're going to feel more of the connection to Azumi. Doesn't matter what she talks about. So that's what I'm really trying to get to. We want to let the audience know we care, and they'll care as long as we care.
So Solarzar, I'm assuming I have a follow-up question.
I know
So
you're Sume, but thank you.
You know, I got to join your conference. I mean, I just finished my class. So question is that, is it okay to speak by turning off the video? I mean, is that polite? I mean, is that acceptable?
Well, once again, if you're trying to create a connection with the audience, one of the things you want them to do is connect with you. So even if everyone in the audience has their video off, you want them to see you. We want to see Sume, especially because she has a matching hat and blouse. I mean, we could not have seen that if you had turned off your video, and we wouldn't be able to connect with you. So I think if the presentation itself, for some reason, calls for that, you might want to do that. Let's say you're running a video as part of your presentation, then you may want to be not seen so that they focus on the video itself, or other ways like that. But I don't know, it's tough enough to connect to the audience this way, for the whole audience to be able to see and gather. And I'm probably looking too much at you and not the camera. But but I would say keep your video on so the audience can see you and connect with you. Okay.
One more question from Arjana. This is related to pathways, level 1 researching and presenting. But how do we connect when we have to give a speech on which we have to present something new by researching and presenting?
Well, research and present something that interests you. You know, it doesn't have to be something you already know, but, you know, for instance, if you always wanted to know what it takes to fly a helicopter, and research that a little bit, and let people know that you're excited about that topic. But if you do something like one of the Toastmasters, one of the clubs I was in for the research topic, researched the letter G. But you know, the interesting thing was, he was engaged with it. He really liked it. He really was. So it was entertaining because he really cared about the letter G. So I would just say research something that interests you and present that. And that's the way to handle that issue. You know, like when we do, so many of us, oh my God, we do that leadership thing of leadership styles. And I've seen it presented probably 99% of the time by people who don't really care. At least care what leadership style you are. Care what you learned about the different leadership styles. At least try to be interested. But certainly on the research topic, do something you like, you're interested in.
Thank you. Any other question?
Yeah, I have one more question.
No, only two maximum. I'm sorry. we already cut off Allison. We gotta.
Okay, sure.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I'm teasing.
Okay, thank you. You talked about being authentic, being yourself. For being yourself, there is a whole journey because you have a span, you have a spectrum of your emotions, right? And when you are delivering a speech, for the whole speech or most of the speech, you just deliver the negative emotion, and the audience may feel bad because it's negative. But that's real. That's the real status of you at that moment. How could we balance, or should we deal with it in a better way?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I will I'm going to address it this way. There have been times in the past when I've shared the story about my father and I gave many, many details that I didn't share this evening, and it left people down. And I've learned from that is that that's not the reason I'm telling the story. So if I'm going to tell you a story because I want you to stay feeling bad, I may want to examine my own motives. But I've got to give you an out. I've got to give you a way out. As the speaker, I see that as my responsibility. So I want to bring you in to feel that moment of emotion. And then I've got to find a way to bring you out and bring you back up. Because if I try saying anything after I've brought you down, it's not going to be heard. It doesn't matter how well it's written, how well it's presented. The audience member is going to be stuck at that down point. So it's my responsibility to, one, not bring you down so low that I can't bring you back, and two, make sure I find a way to bring you back up from there so that what I want you to get from that can be heard and understood. And I have to remember, Patricia Fritz said it absolutely correctly, in my opinion, of course, that we want to be heard, we want to be understood, we want to be remembered, and we want to be repeated. Because if we're being repeated, we're remembered, we were understood, and we were heard.
So for every speech, it's all about leveling up the
Yes.
audience, right?
Yes, we should never leave them down. Even at celebrations of life or funerals or wakes, you notice there's always this piece of coming back to the celebration of what the person contributed, what they meant to people in their lives. Yes, we've lost a human being, but we want to celebrate what they brought to our lives. So if we even look at our speeches the same way, we never want to leave you with a body in the coffin. We want to bring you back to what it meant to our lives and how we'll carry that forward.
Okay, thank you.
That's a pretty vivid image.
Thank you for the great questions, everybody. Before I hand control over to Gavin, Solarzar, if you can kind of let us know the final comment at the takeaways. What would be the takeaways you would like the audience to get out of? And if you can let us know in maybe 1 or 2 minutes, short comments in the end, that would be wonderful.
Well, I would really just like everybody to think more about how they can present who they are when they speak to us, how we can, instead of being so formula driven. I actually had one person say, oh, look at my speeches that I do, but the person is formula driven. They're really well done. They're really entertaining, but it's not about connecting. And I think it's so important for us, especially in this day and age, as we are right now, to find ways of connecting with other people, not because our message is profound, but because we're connecting. We all want connection. And I would like each of us to just consider, are we trying to present a formula, or are we really trying to reach people through our words and our presentations?
Thank you so much again. I would like to give Solarzar a big round of applause, everybody, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for asking.
With that, let me hand the control over to Gavin for the announcements and so on. Over to you, Gavin.
Okay, thank you, Izumi, for conducting the meeting, and thank you for Solarzar for me, especially. I have learned a lot about the foundation of a presentation or a speech, because, for instance, the premise is really the key, the first step for us to build the positive influence